Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and welcome to the Past DevOps Virtual Group. My name's Hamish Watson, and alongside me, I have my good friends Christian and Rob Sewell. Do you guys want to say good
G'day, mate.
G'day.
day? Nice one. Um, So, before we kick off with today's presentation by Paul Stanton from Windocks, I've just got a few past community news things to go through. Past Summit 2019 registration is now open, and in fact, I think there's a special on. If you registered now, it's $500 less than what it is, so $500 off. Past marathon in Spanish. This is on February 21st at 5 p.m. UTC time. So register now at the link you see there. And we have the Data Expert Series, where you can gain on-demand access to 16 of the top-rated sessions from Past Summit 2018. And the architecture, data management, and analytics streams are now available full download at just $129 each. But you can actually purchase the whole complete session from sessions from Past Summit for only $300. Microsoft Roadshow on SQL Server and Azure Data Services. So you can register for this free event near you. You're going to hear from the engineering leaders on SQL Server and event partners who are going to share the new innovations in SQL Server 2019, Azure Data Services, hardware, services, Linux, and more. So yeah, there's the link there. So yeah, feel free to register for that. Upcoming virtual group webinars. We have these are all in the past, so we won't worry about these because we're running one right now. The one on the bottom there. The ones coming up in the future are the PowerShell, database administration, DBA fundamentals, and professional development, all through later today through to early March. And the DBA fundamentals, data architecture, again, the DBA global Italian one. And we have, yay, it is here. So our virtual group will be hosting from MVP Summit, where Rob and myself will be March 21st. And we're going to have a whole group of people giving lightning talks. And you'll see Grant Pritchie's name there. We've got a whole heap of people. So we'll be doing a mail out pretty soon to let you know. But it's going to be pretty cool. Basically, what does DevOps mean to some of our industry leaders from a wide range across the technology platform?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just data, but DevOps as a theme. So it's going to be
Yeah.
awesome. Don't miss that.
Yeah, that's a really good point there, Rob. Yeah, it's going to be every single part of yeah, technology. Yeah, past virtual groups, please join them. You know, the great thing about them is you can join whenever you want. Sorry, you can watch them from wherever you want. Upcoming SQL Saturdays, US, Canada, a whole heap there. Latam, yeah, you got 3. EMEA, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the one at 829. But of course, the most important one is this weekend here in New Zealand. In fact, I leave this broadcast to jump on a tiny little plane and fly to Wellington, where I'm going to be talking about test-driven development, because that's really important.
But
Anyway, please.
we'll both also be at Spokane as well, won't we? You and I.
Yeah, we will. Yes, we will, my friend. Yeah, March 23rd. Yeah, that's going to be a cool one. Well, actually, we're driving to it together. It's going to be a
We
road
are.
trip.
It's going to
It's
be
going to be
awesome.
all good. And in fact, oh, I may as well keep promoting myself, you know. I'm going to be at Victoria on March 16th because I love Victoria. It's a really beautiful part of Canada. Alrighty, connect with Pass. You know, follow the hashtag SQL Pass on Twitter and the account SQL Pass, as well as the Pass community one. But yeah, sign up for free membership today. I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be where I am today without my past membership. I learned so much, going to Past Summit, watching virtual uh, groups like this one, and attending SQL Saturday. So connect with Pass. It's there to help you connect, learn, and ultimately share. Alrighty, so at this point, I'm going to swap to our presenter today. We have Paul Stanton from Windocks. Thank you, Paul, so much for taking time out of your day to present to us. So I'm going to give you the reins.
Awesome. Thank you, Hamish.
No worries.
Okay, so you should be able to see my slide.
Oh, yeah, it is.
All right.
The
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about SQL Server containers. We're going to frame the discussion in terms of a second anniversary review. We're actually approaching the third anniversary of SQL Server containers. Now, I'm a co-founder of Windocks. We are an independent port of Docker source to Windows. So we were an alternative to the built-in Windows containers in Windows Server 2016 and Windows 10. And I'm here to talk about SQL Server containers in an overall DevOps context. And you can find me at pauls@windocks.com. Now, a discussion of DevOps often revolves around, this discussion of, well, are we talking about structured tooling and reporting, or are we talking about the people and culture? And I want to say right off the bat that obviously both are important, but our focus today is really going to be on the tooling side of the, proposition. And personally, I think that providing a structured set of tooling with reporting is critical for driving, the culture and the behavior involved in the collaboration and teamwork of a DevOps process. But I'm biased, because I'm involved on the tooling side. But today we're going to talk about why are people adopting containers for DevOps, and particularly SQL Server containers. Well, we're going to take a look at where do we stand at this 2 or 2.5 year mark on SQL Server containers. Spend a few minutes talking about best practices and what are people really doing. And I'm also going to share a new approach to working with production databases as part of a DevOps process. So should be interesting. Now I want to encourage you guys to interject with questions, or you guys and gals. Please interject with questions throughout this discussion. Rob, Hamish, Christian, you guys can flag me as questions come up, and we'll address them as we go. I think SQL Server containers for DevOps are critical for the SQL Server community, and I'll say that it's the case because containers are now de facto standard tooling for DevOps. Docker containers have taken the industry by storm. They're supported by Microsoft on Windows. Clearly, Microsoft is embracing Docker containers on Linux in a grand fashion, particularly for SQL 2017 and 2019. Along with containers, the infrastructure of the future is likely to revolve around Kubernetes. Kubernetes expects containers, as well as other platforms, be it Docker Swarm, OpenShift, or Pivotal, and other platforms I'm sure that we'll see going forward in the future. Docker containers are also a great complement on any Azure-based strategy, and particularly SQL Azure database for a fast, efficient dev test environment. Containers used with SQL Azure will generally result in about an 80% savings, in addition to being much faster and economical compared to doing development on SQL Azure. Containers also drive about a 5 times reduction in VM usage. If you're looking at DevOps strategies based on VMs, it's a lot of economy to be gained, a lot of efficiencies to be gained with containers. The other thing I assert today and this is based on discussions with many people who have adopted containers, is containers properly implemented will enhance the enterprise security story. There's going to be a reduced attack surface because fewer VMs, and the data used with DevOps can be secured in the form of Docker images. We're not going to drill down into great depth on that today, but I do think it's an important consideration. And as we mentioned up front, we're at the 2.5-year mark on SQL Server containers, and they've really grown to maturity in that time. For those of you who have worked with SQL Server containers, you can appreciate that the support for SQL Server containers in a complex service stack like SQL Server has been an evolving story. It's not always been easy to understand where the various containers are at in terms of their feature set. Clearly, SQL Server 2017 and 2019 have evolved very significantly with SQL agent support and SSIS, and now support for the Azure AKS service. The official Microsoft Windows SQL Server images, however, have languished now for the past year, and I think that it's fair to say that they've been deprecated in favor of Linux containers. Rob, you and I were chatting before this session, and one perspective is, hey, a container can be a level of abstraction that's really independent of the operating system. And I think that's a very fair comment for projects that are running on SQL Server 2017 or 2019. But for the vast majority of the users in the marketplace that are running on earlier versions, be it anywhere from SQL 2008 through to SQL 2016, that's really not the case. That theirs is an environment that's really focused on Windows. And that's what Windocks is about. Windocks is really your alternative for Windows SQL Server container support. We're in our 4th major release, just came out late in 2018. And Windocks supports all editions of SQL Server 2008 onward. We include a web UI. We have role-based access to containers and images, encrypted secret support with database cloning. We just recently introduced SSRS support, which is drawing a lot of interest on Azure, as some of you may not find too surprising. And we're also going to talk about some new approaches to DevOps tooling that uses production databases today. So the bottom line is, I think that SQL Server containers have arrived. We've got many clients now that are rolling out Windows SQL Server container support along with database cloning, and I know that Microsoft has tremendous engagement on Linux containers as well. I just wanted to spend a minute just to help people understand what the differences are between Windocks and Microsoft Windows SQL containers. And what Microsoft implemented on Windows Server 2016 and Windows 10 is a Linux-style container. And by a Linux-style container, I'm talking about a container that actually includes portions of the operating system in the container along with the application. And so on the official Windows container design, you've got a fairly large Windows footprint in the container, and the containers run on a shared Windows kernel. And in contrast, the Windocks design uses conventional SQL Server namespace isolation and delivers SQL Server containers with nothing but the SQL Server process and services. And then, of course, we run on the shared operating system. And what this does is it explains why the Windows containers are the images are so large. 10 gigabyte images is common for SQL Server on Windows in the Docker repo. And when the Windows updates occur, then the images and the containers need to be rebuilt. Another widely appreciated issue with this design is that it has broken compatibility with existing enterprise infrastructure, most notably being Active Directory and Windows Auth. So the official Windows containers do not support Windows Auth. And as we mentioned earlier, those images are now largely deprecated. Travis Wright is the principal PM for the SQL Server containers, and he's quite direct in the fact that the Microsoft SQL Server division is now focused on Linux for SQL Server container support. I want to pause here. Do you guys have any questions that have come up at this point?
Hi there. No, not seeing everything. Everybody's very quiet. So
okay,
please feel free, anybody. As soon as you got a question, just shout it out.
Yep. So let's chat for a minute about the best practices with SQL Server containers. And these are observations that I would share based on our clients. And start with a small team. SQL Server containers are easily added to existing systems and use existing infrastructure today. So it's very straightforward for a small team to provision a VM, be it on Azure or on-premise, install Docker support for SQL Server, and be up and running with images and being productive within a few hours. Another comment I would make is that relatively few organizations today are going to go all in on containers by themselves. So our clients commonly will use containers along with SQL Server instances to meet their complete development and test needs. Case in point, we have several real estate associations in North America running with containers. They tend to use SQL Server replication, which is not supported by SQL Server containers today. And in those cases, they use database cloning with instances when they were working with the replication aspect of their apps. But they've adopted SQL Server containers for other work being done by their development and test teams. So just want people to understand that there's no need to be exclusively focused on containers. The tooling available today supports both containers and SQL Server instances with database cloning. And this leads into the next point, which is container strategy really needs to contemplate data delivery for those containers. It's interesting and fun to provision a SQL Server container in a matter of seconds, but if the dev test process requires a 300 or 400 or 500 gigabyte database or even multi-terabyte databases, the pizzazz of containers drops significantly in a short order simply because people are going to be waiting around potentially for an hour or 2 hours for the database to be copied and available. So database cloning is critical, in my view, for a complete container strategy. Windows-based VHD database clones. This is the same technology used by Redgate SQL clone as well as Windocks. Supports environments up to 3 terabytes pretty well. For larger environments, we recommend the use of storage arrays. We have clients that work with 25 and 30 terabyte environments with containers, believe it or not, and it works very, very well. Another point is that a DevOps strategy really needs to include, in addition to containers, in addition to the data delivery, the integration for the orchestration of that DevOps process, and that's typically going to involve PowerShell and API development. I was just meeting with one of our clients recently that had developed some APIs to wrap the Windocks process into a larger Azure DevOps pipeline. And I have to say it's pretty cool. Also say that, it's a pretty important aspect of a long-term plan is how will this tool chain be orchestrated. Final point is that SQL Server Containers is an opportunity to build in security to improve data governance throughout the process. And it's important to contemplate data security today, and certainly anyone that's looking to modernize their approach to SQL Server development and test, I think should really pay attention and address security and how that will be addressed in the new tools. I just want to spend a minute on the elements of data container and data security. We mentioned earlier the importance of Windows Auth and Active Directory support. I'll leave that as it's pretty clear in most organizations that's key. Another point to address is the need for role-based access to containers and images. Organizations will expect control over the access to containers and images. Again, that's best facilitated with Active Directory support. Another important point is trusted SQL Server images. The Windocks design, as I mentioned earlier, the way in which we deliver the SQL Server containers is by cloning a locally installed SQL Server instance. And that gives enterprises the proven SQL Server namespace isolation that's trusted today throughout the world. And it gives the IT organization and the developers full control over the configurations that are inherited by the containers through that cloned local instance. Another very important point that I want to stress today is that a complete SQL Server DevOps strategy will contemplate relational database, the relational data, as a first-class Docker artifact. And by that, I mean that the data will be included in the Docker image. And we're going to talk a little bit further, and I'll demonstrate how this is done. By putting the data into the Docker image, it becomes an immutable, image at that point. The data can be secured with data masking and other privacy policies. And it also importantly then becomes a source of metadata for, a number of data governance reasons. And of course, the encryption and data masking and creating an audible data record. So let's talk about SQL Server containers and how they're being used today in a DevOps type processes. We've been at this now for just about 3 years. We've got a number of people doing a lot of different interesting things with SQL Server containers. I think that in all of the cases I'm going to reference here, database cloning is also core to their process and design. John Hancock is a well-known US-based insurer, and they run SQL Server containers with database cloning on Azure as a complement to SQL Azure, which is hosts their production environments. So on a daily basis, they're taking backups, updating images with the data, securing those images with data masking, and serving up those environments not only for dev and test, but also for other purposes as well, including financial reporting and other such things. This notion of running SQL Server containers on Azure as a complement to SQL Azure is very popular. John Hancock certainly not the only one doing it, and it generates tremendous savings as well as efficiencies compared to the costs of doing development on SQL Azure. We have a large technology firm that we work with that is serving up 25 terabyte data warehouses for BI use using database cloning off of a storage array with SQL Server containers. We have a healthcare provider that uses a SAN with SQL Server containers to deliver a 4 terabyte environment for daily ETL processing. Real estate associations I mentioned a few minutes ago are using database cloning with containers and instances for their dev test support. We have a healthcare claims provider that has a full stack SQL Server application. They use SQL Server containers with SSRS with production databases for their dev test and user acceptance testing in their process. And an additional point I want to make is that these people are doing all of these things without the overhead of Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is, I think, very clearly the future. The infrastructure for distributed systems of the future. Today, we also have firms that are integrating the SQL Server containers as a backend to a Kubernetes-based environment. Microsoft is obviously pushing SQL Server as a native Kubernetes workload and featuring a HA type design for that. But I just want to point out that a practical approach to SQL Server container does not require Kubernetes today, certainly in the case of Windows SQL Server containers. In fact, a more practical orchestration approach for many organizations will be Docker Swarm. Docker Swarm will give you all the benefits of Kubernetes with a dramatically simpler management and overhead associated with it, and with the flexibility to be run easily on premise. Kubernetes today is sufficiently complex where it's really a Azure specific strategy. And I'm not saying that Kubernetes is not important, certainly on our list of things to support in the near term, but I do want to emphasize that you can pursue a very robust DevOps strategy with SQL Server containers without having to take on the complexities and overhead of Kubernetes. Okay, so this is bringing me up to what the new piece that's available for Windows, and for that matter, Linux SQL Server containers. And in this strategy, what we're doing is we're combining production database clones. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see DB1, 2, and 3. Those are SQL Server clone images, and we'll think of those as production database environments. And then, of course, you have some kind of source repo. In this case, we're working with Git, and we're going to be able to implement a process where a container can include the database clone with a full complement of the scripts that are in the Git repo. So each container will have the assigned database with whatever scripts are in that repo at that point in time. But the trick is that the users will have control over which of the scripts are applied to the database in their environment. So you can imagine there will be testers that would be provisioning a container that would apply only the upgrade script. They also will be provisioning containers that would apply both the upgrade script and a rollback script. And other people may be provisioning images with just the database present. And we think that this will be a new approach to enable people to incorporate, full production, secured production databases into a DevOps process. And the point of this process would be to allow development and test to work with environments that are, as close as possible to production. And as close as possible to production in our view is, well, simply do your DevOps process with the full production database. Now, this does not imply that you would do that without security. As I mentioned earlier, it's straightforward to incorporate data masking and other security policies in the database image. But this is a new approach to DevOps that really makes it practical for people to work with the full production database to the degree they want. And the way in which this will be done is we're simply adding a environment variable to the Docker commands to run, the designated script. It could be the upgrade script, or it could be the upgrade script and the rollback script, or it could be simply the image without any of the scripts applied. And that's a relatively simple, but we think a pretty effective way to incorporate, the use of a Git repo with database cloning. Any questions at this point? You guys are really letting me off easy.
Yeah, I think everybody's a little bit, here we go, let's go. So what is a SQL clone image? Is it just a Windocks image? We've got a question in.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually leads into the next discussion. So a SQL clone image is just as Redgate SQL clone creates an image, Windocks does the same for Windows VHDs. Now, Windocks also supports the use of storage arrays to create a clonable image. But in this case, let's just walk through the workflow of building a image that uses a Windows VHD for cloning databases. So on the lower left is the Windocks server. It's the container engine. It also is a database cloning engine. It's really a dual purpose. It serves containers. It also serves database clones. It serves containers, but it also serves database clones that can be delivered to SQL Server containers, both Microsoft's and Windocks, and we also serve database clones to SQL Server instances as well. So it's a general purpose database cloning solution. On the lower right is a Docker command and a Docker file. And on the upper right is a source of a backup where the VHD will be built. You can see the Docker file in the lower right-hand box begins with from MS SQL 2016. So all we're saying is that we're going to use a 2016 environment, in this case, a SQL Server container. And then we have two commands, setup, cloning, full. Those are commands that will use full backups to build a VHD that serves up database clones from those two backups, those two databases. You can see that each database is located on the test machine in the DB backups folder. And then at the final step, there's a process to copy and run a SQL Server script against one of those databases. Now that Docker file is sent to the server, and the first thing it does is it provisions the SQL Server container. It sees that it needs to build a VHD because VHDs are associated with setup, clone, and command. And it sees the location of the backup is on the test machine in the DB backups folder. So the VHD will be built in that location. And then the backups are restored into the new VHD. And when the backups are complete, restore is complete, the script is run. And then the VHD is unmounted from the container and saved as an immutable Docker image. Now, once that image is created, then you can serve up database clones from that image. It can be a multi-terabyte environment. The clones will be served up in a matter of 30 seconds and delivered to your target environment, whether your target environment is a SQL Server container or a SQL Server instance. And when I say container, I'm including all of the SQL Server containers today.
We've got a couple of questions, Paul.
Sure.
If I may. So the first one is, does the database cloning solution only work with Windocks?
No. As I said, this database cloning solution can deliver clones to Microsoft SQL containers, both Windows and Linux. If you go to our website or even do a search on Windocks on SQL Server Central, you'll see that we've published articles on how this process supports delivery of database clones to SQL Linux containers. And we also serve up database clones to SQL instances as well. So it is a Windocks-based cloning engine, but we support delivery of those database clones to any SQL Server environment in the market.
Excellent, thank you. The second question is, high availability. So can we configure always on, mirroring, etc. with Windocks SQL servers?
Yeah, SQL Server containers today do not support, ours do not support HA and always on configurations. We are working with a number of clients for various strategies for HA. I don't expect that we're going to support the always on architecture. It'll use storage arrays and storage systems with replicated containers for a simple HA strategy. Another case is we're working with a large client that's using SSRS containers with SQL Azure, and of course they need high availability for a large scale production environment with SSRS. And there again, what we'll do is we'll have SSRS containers running on the primary source databases and report server databases, and then we'll have secondary containers connected to the replicas and failover through that HA design there as well. So HA is certainly part of our plan. Not likely that we're going to support the current always-on architecture offered by Microsoft.
Excellent. So I've got another slightly more complex question. Here we go. In step 2, you go from SQL Server instance to the SQL container. Is that process scripting out any of the configuration scripts to SQL statements or PowerShell? Can any edits be made between the server and the container within a script to container? Or do these settings need to be in the live instance before the container build is initialized?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually we do both. In this case, you can see that we're applying a script to a database clone image at build time. But there are many, many cases where scripts need to be applied to the containers at runtime as well. And in fact, this is a case where scripts are being applied to the container at runtime. So we support PowerShell and scripting at both image build time as well as container runtime to support a broad range of needs. There are cases where people want to affect changes to users, user access to a container at runtime. There are cases where there's a need to deal with container level encryption certificates at runtime for TDE and external key manager support. So yes, the answer is both. We've got very robust support for scripting with both T-SQL and PowerShell at build and runtime. Any other questions?
That's all we have at the moment.
Okay, very good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just switch over here for a quick demo. This happens to be the web UI that we've built. And you can see what we've done here is the clone image is actually put into the Docker image. So the database clone is included in a image. We've got a pretty simple image name here called clone. You can fault me for lack of creativity. And you can see that there's a number of databases included in this image. And Rob will honor you with, we'll name a container after you today.
Thank you so much.
The users have the option to assign, ports and SA passwords if they choose to. It's purely optional. We also can select a subset of the databases if we choose to, or we can have the complete image delivered. And what's happening now is we're provisioning a SQL Server container, and at the same time, we're also cloning an existing VHD image. So the database clone is going to be delivered and mounted to this container for Rob, and it takes about 30 seconds, and that is irrespective of the size of that image. So it could be a 3 terabyte environment, or it could be 50 gigabytes in size. It'll take about 30 seconds in both cases. And the other cool thing is that, and I'm going to go ahead and start this now, is that the storage consumption of the database clone is like 40 megabytes on delivery. So it's a very, very efficient way for an organization to serve up, large, complex SQL Server environments for, dev and test. So let's access this new container. I'm going to use the Windows authentication just to show that, what the heck? Oh, let's try the right environment here for this.
Yeah, Rob's a SQL Server DBA man.
Yeah. And so there you go. So this could be a 3 terabyte environment, or it could be 50 gigs, but this shows the simplicity of working with database cloning with SQL Server containers. This is a full-on SQL Server instance on the host. It has all of the attributes of a SQL Server instance, albeit we don't support HA, with always on design, nor can we support things like SQL Server replication, but the vast majority of SQL Server configurations are supportable. And just to show you, we've got standard Docker client commands that shows us the use of Docker client commands like Docker PS, Docker images. We can create a MS SQL 2014 environment. And now, in this case, this host has a local SQL Server 2014 instance that's being cloned to deliver a container. And this is how we're able to support all the existing infrastructure. We're able to use Windows networking, Windows authentication, really any volume shadow services or SQL Writer-based app will interoperate with these SQL Server containers. And you can see that a standard Docker client return includes a long, unique container ID. And in this case, we're running at port 10,001. You'll see that we're also not delivering a SQL SA password. That's another aspect of our design, is that it's configurable for security purposes, whether you want to work with SQL SA passwords, and at the same time, a user can define his own SQL SA password if he chooses. Now, we were just talking. Well, I've got an image here that will deliver a single database to a SQL Server instance. And I've got the SQL instance on the LAN, and I can serve up databases to that as well, because that was a question that came up earlier. And so that's a very quick review of what SQL Server containers on Windows can be. This is obviously the Windocks product. It's not a free built-in thing with Windows, admittedly. There is a license associated with this, but a lot of people find it's a good investment. So let's go back. Oh, first let's come back here where we can wrap up. So in conclusion, I say, containers at this point are a very proven approach for SQL Server dev and test, and I believe it's the best approach for any DevOps strategy. I think it's the best approach for DevOps because it's the most efficient, but it's also forward-looking. I think that clearly the future involves SQL Server on Linux, and people are going to want to get onto Docker tooling. I think the future also will include platforms like Kubernetes, and containers are the way to get there. I would say Windows SQL Server containers support your existing infrastructure and are easily deployed for individual teams. We've got people that download and install and get started, in 30 minutes. It's very straightforward. And database cloning with containers should enhance your data security. For SQL Azure, I think containers are a terrific way to deliver very efficient dev test support with a dramatic cost reduction. And as we've seen here, we're also introducing the notion of working with production databases as part of a DevOps process. And that really wraps up the presentation I had planned for today. I think we're ahead of schedule. You guys have kind of let me off without too many questions, but let's open it up for questions again at this point.
It's unusual, Paul. We appear to have a very shy group in today. Normally they're quite chirpy.
All right, that's not a problem. So,
Paul, just a sec. We actually
Sure.
got one more question. That is there a Linux version of Windocks?
no, there is not. We've contemplated porting our design at some point, but at this point, that's just a future potential. No real plans to do that. We think that there's a very large, market with many varied customer needs to address on the Windows platform. So it's likely that's our focus going forward.
And another one is, so are there any use of Docker plus SQL in production environments?
I can't speak for Microsoft. Today, the vast majority of our customers are using containers for dev and test support and as part of a DevOps process. We just released SSRS containers in the October timeframe, and we do have customers that are moving forward with plans to use those for production reporting. So I think, next quarter I'll be able to answer affirmatively. Today, it's not the case. SSRS containers really will be our first foray into, genuine production usage.
The wonderful Ben asks, where's the best place to get more information and demos?
Well, I'd love to have people visit windocks.com. I also welcome people to email me or reach out on LinkedIn. My email address is pauls@windocks.com. I'm happy to provide software so people can get up to speed on Windows SQL Server containers, and happy to meet with people online, answer any questions people have. I'm always happy to do so.
Excellent, thank you. I've still got some more questions coming in. So with Azure containers, are the deploying containers to Azure from on-prem, or are they building the containers off Azure and then using the containers on-prem? So
the Windocks host can be installed and run on-prem, and it can be used there. It can be connected to data sources elsewhere on the network or even over a WAN. But the common use with SQL on Azure is running it on a VM on Azure. So in the case of John Hancock and others, what they're doing is they're running a VM on Azure as part of their Active Directory infrastructure, but they're using backups from their SQL Azure operations.
Excellent. And how is SQL licensing affected with a container?
Yeah, great question. It's another aspect of how our design is kind of neat. Microsoft defines each container as being like a VM, and they do that. They're able to do that in part because the containers actually include a substantial portion of the operating system. So Microsoft defines those as being kind of an operating system environment, or an OSE. Windocks SQL Server containers, however, are a clone of a locally installed instance, and under all existing SQL Server licenses are treated as a named instance. SQL Server licenses today provide unlimited instances through cloning for licensed servers. So SQL Server, Windocks SQL Server containers are essentially free under Microsoft SQL Server licensing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool artifact of the design. Any other questions?
I've got nothing I can see coming through at the moment. What's the difference between the free edition and the one you pay for?
We have a free community edition. It's limited to 2 containers and a fairly small database for cloning. By small, I'm talking about a couple hundred megabytes. So it's a pretty restricted but full-featured edition. The licensed products that we offer then scale into 20 and 50 containers per server, and with varying database cloning capacities. So just like Redgate, we offer a product that supports up to 1 terabyte in database clone images, 3 terabytes and more. Windocks also supports the use of storage arrays, and that's also included in our higher capacity product.
Thank you very much. That looks like about what we've got. Hamish, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, no, I guess the only thing I'm going to add here is one of the reasons I asked Paul if he would, present to us is because I feel it's quite a good, compelling option for people out there, and for me, reporting services, being able to have that in a container and Windows Auth. I mean, I am the man who once built a sidecar container for Kerberos authentication, and I died a little inside. Yeah, I really like the options that Windocks brings along. So thank you, Paul, for taking time out of your day to present to the group. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. Again, for all of you listeners, feel free to reach out. I'm Paul S. at windocks.com. Be happy to get you, our 5 container edition of Windocks, so you guys can see what can be done with Windows SQL Server containers. So thanks very much, guys, and I guess we'll call it a day.
Paul, we just got one more question from Jan. He is saying, how do you set CPU and memory settings for an instance? How is it shared with the host machine?
Yeah, we include resource governance via the Docker, resource limits, but you also can use the SQL Server resource governor as well. So a couple of options for people that want to manage things at that level.
I think that was the last question.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Really enjoyed the opportunity to meet with you guys today.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul.
You bet.